What's going on, knuckleheads? This is the Fighter's Rep. If you like to talk about combat sports, please be sure to click the subscribe button and the bell notification icon next to it. And this right here is our Zabit Magomedsharipov versus our Kelvin Kattar post-fight reaction discussion live. This is basically our little post-fight show with regards to UFC Fight Night 163 that went down in Moscow, Russia this evening. And of course, we're all the way here on the West Coast, so I couldn't get on immediately after the fight to discuss this with you guys. But I definitely wanted to get in, discuss it with you guys a little bit, talk about the results a little bit, because we've also got the KSI Logan Paul going down tonight, and I definitely want to cover that later on in the evening at 9 p.m. Pacific, like we typically do. But let's get right to the point here and right to the main event. Zabit Magomedsharipov, Kelvin Kattar. A good solid fight as expected. Two solid contenders in the featherweight division. As expected, they went to war and it was a good battle. But as expected as well, Zabit Magomedsharipov won that fight, and I thought he won that fight clearly. I predicted Magomedsharipov would just be too much, both striking and on the ground, and he was too much striking and on the ground. I thought he was just too diverse for Kattar. He was countering, he was being offensive, he was moving away, he was, attacking on the inside when he had to. Just showed every single look you can imagine, and he's the kind of guy that really is the personification of the saying, be like water. I mean, this guy does it all whenever he has to do it. He's in constant adjustment against his opponent, and he was in constant adjustment today against Kelvin Kattar. If there is anything I can point to criticize Zabit Magomedsharipov, it's that he looks like he tends to gas out a little bit. And my understanding is he was taking some sort of antibiotic. He was suffering from some sort of infection that he got in Thailand, I'm assuming, while training. And so he wasn't at his peak. He wasn't able to do 5 rounds. I guess they went with a 3-round fight. And you could see it in the 3rd round that he began to gasp. However, is that just an excuse, or does Zabit's style of fighting, the constant movement, the constant switching up of stances, the constant, just thinking, I mean, he doesn't stop. He counters one second, in one sequence, he'll counter with a right hand over the top, and the next he'll counter with a sweep to the leg, and the next he'll counter with a low kick. I mean, the guy's he's all over the place. And so, is it that he was suffering from an infection, and that's why he couldn't do the 5 rounds, and why he sort of seemed to gas a little bit in the 3rd round and give that round away to Kelvin Kattar? Or is it that his style is just too much to keep up for more than 3 rounds? Another thing is, Zabit Magomedsharipov is 6'1.5", knuckleheads. How does a guy who's 6'1.5" cut to featherweight, and is that cut taking his toll on him? Because not only is he 6'1.5", cutting that much weight, he's also got this style where he's constantly moving and adapting. That being said, he won that fight, but does he have an issue with cardio, and is it due to his cutting? Now, I will say, I also noticed in his fight with, I think it was Kyle Bochniak in the end, Bochniak started to sort of come back and make some headway in that fight, and I do think Zabit may have a bit of an issue with that fighting style and his constant activity, perhaps coupled with the fact that he's got to cut so much weight. He's such a tall guy. Perhaps that's what's causing him to gas out a little bit in the end. This time they gave us the excuse of the infection or whatever it was, but this is something that he's going to have to address if it's an actual problem. If he can't go 5 rounds, especially against the champ in that division, Max Holloway, if he can't go 5 rounds, he's going to have a huge problem. So I do think he's fantastic. I do think he has an extremely varied attack. He was great on the ground. He was great standing up. As predicted, he outstruck and outgrappled Kelvin Kattar. And as predicted, in my keys to victory for Zabit, I said he's got to stay on the outside, mix it up, use his kicks, and he did just that. His kicks were incredibly impressive, much more impressive than those of Kattar, who was very reluctant to throw his kicks. He stuck to his boxing, and he just got worked by a guy who just has a much bigger palate than him, a guy who's just much more varied in his attack, didn't know what was coming, and when you're Kattar and you're only relying on boxing, and you've got a guy in front of you who's doing spinning back kicks and countering you low with kicks and countering you high with punches and double jabbing and switching stances, it gives you a lot to think about, and it inhibits your boxing. If you have nothing else to rely on, low kicks, body kicks, teeps, things like that, you're limited in what you can do. And I felt like Zabit's style further limited Kattar, and as predicted, again, Zabit comes away with the victory. Now, big shout out to Marco Martinez and Krishna Kim in the chat. Thank you so much, my brother, for being in the chat. Really appreciate you. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Click the bell notification icon. But Marco Martinez says, I missed the Zabit fight, but I was super impressed with Greg Hardy. He looked tremendous for a guy with 6 fights against a much more experienced and talented fighter. And I would say Volkov is much more experienced, perhaps more talented. That remains to be seen. It remains to be seen if Greg Hardy can continue to improve and maybe show us that he's more talented than we think he is. I do give a lot of credit to him for stepping up late notice and taking on Volkov and doing what he did. He did hurt his arm. The way Marco Martinez said, I believe he hurt his right hand and continued to fight. And I give the guy credit. He was very hard on himself afterwards. That's indicative of somebody with a good work ethic that's determined to get better. So I thought it was a good fight. I thought he put on a good performance, and kudos to him. And I think overall it was an interesting card. We had some good fights on the card, but I think the standout, obviously the most important fight, was the Zabit fight, and I thought he did what he had to do. Again, I'm just a little bit concerned with Zabit's cardio, so tell me if you guys agree with that, knuckleheads. Something we'll revisit maybe a little bit later in the day when we go live after the KSI Logan Paul fight, which is something I want to do later on today. But yeah, I just wanted to briefly touch on Zabit's victory over Kelvin Kattar. There were people on the chat telling me yesterday that, Kattar was going to win this fight. I thought maybe they knew something I didn't. It turns out that that's bullshit. Zabit took that fight, and I think it was pretty clear that he won that fight, even though it was a pretty good fight. Next question is, where does he go from here? Does he get a title shot? What happens after this? I guess it remains to be seen. But I do think Zabit's got the talent to move on and probably challenge for the title, if not in the next fight, in the one afterwards. So let's take a look at some of the other results that I thought were interesting. Obviously, we discussed Alexander Volkov's win over Greg Hardy. It was a good fight. Alexander Volkov with, 38 fights at this point versus a guy in Greg Hardy with only 7 fights. That was a great performance by Greg Hardy to go as far as he did. But, of course, Volkov gets the win. We had Zalim Imadaev get knocked out by Danny Roberts in a great performance by Danny Roberts. Sparked him out in round 2, so great stuff from him. At light heavyweight, we had Ed Herman get the decision win over Khadis Ibragimov. We had Anthony Rocco Martin in a good fight against Ramazan Emiev win a third-round decision. And we had Shamil Gamzatov beat Klidson Farias de Abreu in a decision. Shamil is a 14-0 fighter, so might be something, to look forward to in the future. on the prelim, we had a nice knockout from Magomed Ankalaev over Dalcha Lungiambula. I thought that was a sick knockout. He threw like a sort of Anderson Silva straight kick to the face and then hit Lungiambula with a big right hand and finished him. Rustam Khabilov also came back on the undercard and got a win. Put on a nice performance. Always fun to watch. I really like that guy. That guy's the suplex machine and very entertaining. We also had Carl Roberson get the submission over Roman Kopylov. Great win for him, a guy who apparently trains with Corey Anderson. So, you know, they're tearing it up over there. A big upset for David Zawada over Abubakar Nurmagomedov, who is the cousin of Khabib Nurmagomedov, who lost in front of all his people in Russia. Not a good look for him. He's now 15-3-1, and David Zawada is 17-5. So, I mean, it goes to show you in the UFC, you can be an underdog, but you still got a great chance to win, and you are a live dog in the UFC if you're an underdog typically. Roosevelt Roberts with a decision win over Alexander Yakovlev. Penny Kianzad, decision over Jessica Rose Clark. And Davy Grant getting the decision over Grigory Popov. And that's what we had, knuckleheads. So, you know, tell us what you guys thought of the card. Really appreciate you guys joining me for this little brief results video, post-fight reaction. Krishna Kim saying Abe Lincoln can fight, which is hilarious. That's what everybody's calling Zabit Magomedsharipov at this time. Marco Martinez saying, see you tonight, George. Zabit is next level. Hell yeah, Zabit is no joke. But again, little bit of concern on my part for his cardio. And then we have somebody who is writing something in Cyrillic here. I'm thinking it might be Russian. I think that last word looks like Habib. I've seen it written in Russian before. I'm not sure what you're saying there, brother. But appreciate you joining. And hopefully if you can write in English, you join us again at 9 p.m. Pacific. Knuckleheads, keep it clean. We'll see you guys in a little bit. Take care.